All right, so let's take a look at where we left off last time. So I'm gonna hit Alt P to play, and I'm walking around my environment here. You can see I have this table, which is pretty high, which I don't actually mind because I'm going to be creating my own character that's maybe double the size of this model that's in here. But in this video, I'd like to take a look at how we can kind of spruce up this model. So maybe we're, in my particular video game, you're investigating a scene and there's a birthday cake on this table. And instead of modeling in here, let's take a look at how we can model that and make it look pretty nice inside of Maya. Now, one of the things to pay attention to as well is that ZBrush and Maya and Blender and all these tools have their advantages above to just modeling inside of Unreal. So I'm going to right click on table here and I'm going to go to browse to asset, and it took me to this table here. Now, if you right click in here, you'll be like, well, how do I export this out to Maya? And there is no option outside of the outliner as far as I know. But once you browse to asset and you right click in here, you'll see that you have this asset actions here and you can go to export. And on my desktop, I can go ahead and save this as table and export it as an FBX. So I'm gonna go ahead and pause the video. I'm fine with these settings here, and I'm gonna import this into Maya. All right, so I'm in Maya and I'm just gonna go to File and then Import and then just navigate to my desktop and grab that table model. Now, a couple things to know once you're in here is there's this little Dunkin' Donuts guy. And when we go to settings, mine is default set to meters, which is totally okay. When I go to export it, I'd like to use centimeters. Now, there's a couple other things where it comes to scaling issues. Like, and if you don't see this, just switch from attribute editor to channel box, which is also Control A. And you want these set to 1. Now, let's start off by making a tablecloth. I'm going to assume that you have a very basic understanding of Maya, if anything at all. So if I skip some things, you might want to do another tutorial that kind of clarifies how to model something simple. But for now, I'm going to do my best to explain every step that I do as I'm working in here. So in order to rotate, I hold Alt and left mouse button. And then in order to zoom in and out, I scroll my wheel. Another thing to do is you hold Alt and middle mouse click to pan. So I'm going to actually keep repeating those steps. Forgive me if it gets monotonous, but or redundant rather, as I do this. So let's go up to create Polygon Primitive, and I'm going to go ahead and make a plane. Now, something that I have on is interactive creation. So let's take a look at the difference between that. If it's checked off and I go to create Polygon Primitive and I click on plane, you could see it created one down here. Now notice that this plane is actually quite small compared to my table. And the reason for that is I'm bringing things in here. My table is, in respect to unit scales for Maya, if I was switching between meters and centimeters, it's actually quite big. So what I'll normally do in here is I'll usually, if I'm doing anything with physics, which is what we're gonna be doing to create a tablecloth, I'll make my model a bit smaller. So I'll explain that in a second, why I do that more in detail, but just keep that in mind because that's what our next step is gonna be. So back to our modeling, I'm going to delete this by left clicking on it and then hitting delete. But if I go in here and I go to create Polygon Primitive and I turn on interactive creation, it gives me a bit more control over the dragging out the shape. So let's go ahead and select plane. So create Polygon Primitive plane. Now it'd be easier for me to actually go to my top view. So I'm going to hit spacebar here and I'm going to go to my top view. And this is the top view of my table. Now, what I tend to do is make my tablecloth quite huge and full of a ton of polys because you need a lot of polygons for end cloth to be to give you accurate deformation. So let's take a look at what that is. So I'm left clicking and I'm dragging out this big plane. Then I'm going to hit spacebar. I'm going to go back to this view. And I'm going to try to line this up with the center of the table here, like that. And in the side here, and if you don't see this, click on Polyplane 1, and remember to hit Control A too. I'm going to go ahead and just do something pretty high, which is 100 by 100. Now, if you're wondering how I got it so that both were at the same time, I left clicked in here and I highlighted both and I hit 100. Another thing you might be wondering is well, why doesn't your mine have the wireframe on top? And that's this button here, wireframe on shaded, this button right here. And I also have the ambient occlusion on, which helps me with modeling, and that's this right here generally. All right, so there's our plane. And if I want to see through it, I can hit 4 to see the location. So I'm kind of positioning this a little bit better. Now, if I go in here and I go to from modeling to FX and I add an Cloth Modifier here, when I go ahead and press play or hit spacebar, let's hit play. Sorry, I don't have that map. Notice how slow it's moving down. And that's because of the sheer scale of this. So I'm going to hit Control Z to remove Cloth. And I'm going to select both of these. Now notice these are set to 111. And this is also set to 111. If yours are not, and they have some weird values, go up to Modify Freeze Transformations, and that'll clean that out. Now I'm going to select both of these, and I'm going to set the scale to 0.1. And I'm going to go ahead and move this down. And I'm going to hit Z like zebra, or I'm sorry, F like focus to focus. And I'm going to move this down a little bit. Sorry, I switched through applications quite a bit. Now, let's hit 5 here. When I go back and I add that Cloth modifier and I press play, notice that it goes by a lot quicker. See that? Versus the other one. All right, I'm going to undo that because there's a couple things I want to do. One, this table only has a few cuts in it, like vertices. So if I hit 4 here, you can see. So when I go to actually apply this cloth and it falls, it's not going to catch as well. So let's see my explanation in action. So I'm going to hit Create Cloth. And you probably noticed before it falls directly through the table. Actually, let's go ahead and make this 240 frames. So it gives us more room. Ooh, maybe it needs to go higher. Let's go 500 frames. I'm wondering if these need to, oh, you know what? These need to be 0.1 in scale, and this needs to be 0.1. All right, let's see. And if we press play, still falls rather slow. I wonder if, here, let's hit spacebar here. Let's check our settings. We're definitely in meters. And this one, let's go ahead and delete this for a second and get rid of this nucleus. I think it's remembering the last settings. And I'm going to quickly make another plane here. Just drag this out, pretty big. Same as before, mark this up to 100. Bring it above here. And let's add the Cloth and see if it's faster now. It's a little bit faster. All right, let's go back. And now if I select this and I make this the a passive collider, it shouldn't fall through. So let's see. And I'm going to press 5 really quick. It actually is grabbing pretty well to that table. Well, see how it's falling through the table at this point? That's a problem. And the way to solve that issue is there's a couple ways. You can scroll a bit slower to give it time to process. No, it's still doing it. The other way to do it is notice all these things called vertices. So if I right click here and I go to vertex, this table actually doesn't have that many vertexes. So if I hit 4 here, and what it does is it looks at that vertex data for what it's going to latch onto. So a trick is I'm going to go ahead and hit Control Z a couple times until I remove from this table the collider information. And I'm going to go up here to the top. I'm going to do Create Polygon Primitive Cube. And let's hit spacebar and go to our top view here. And then hit F to focus. And let's press 4. And I'm going to just go ahead and drag out a box roughly the same size as our table here. Come on, let me do it. There we go. And I'm going to move it up here just so that it controls that area. And I'm going to make all these elements 100 as well. Then I'm going to add the passive collider, and I'm going to go ahead and press play. And I'm going to let it do its thing. Let's hit spacebar here and take a look at it in action. There we go. And it looks like it was a little low, but that's okay. Just trying to get some nice cloth folds there. And let's actually select this and add it to its old layer. So I click this to create a new layer, and then I right click, add selected objects, and then I uncheck V to hide it. So let's see here. So not bad. It's still missing a little. Oh, let me see here. Looks like I hit the wrong thing. So let's take this off for a second. Let's make sure that, and I'm going to scroll slowly, sort of controlling it a little bit more. We might need more than 500 frames for this. Let's go up to 1,000. Let's go to 2,000. I kind of like it about here. All right, so once we have something like this, in order to lock it in so that if we're doing any sort of animation and it doesn't keep computing, is we need to get rid of this end cloth shape here. Actually, maybe if we go a little bit slower. Let's press play and let it work its way out. There we go. That's looking pretty good. I like it about there. Okay. So I kind of like that. So what I'm going to do here is so that it doesn't so I can kind of lock this shape in, is I'm going to go ahead and do, with this plane selected, edit, delete by type, history. And you'll notice now it's gone. So as I scroll through this, you see nothing. And then I'm going to go ahead and delete this box. We don't need it. I'm going to unhide my table. And I can just kind of pull this up a little bit. And I'm going to do edit, delete, all by type history to kind of clean everything. Selecting both of these. Well, this one's already set to 1, but I'll change this back to 1 here. And I'm going to grab this, hit R, and that's our scale tool. Now, if you click on this, you'll see it expands it width. This expands it that way. This does height, X and Z. I'm just going to go ahead and just scale this up from the center, which uniform scales this, and just bring it up like this. Something like that. And just kind of play with tweaking this. And a little bit of that. All right, now, this is very high poly. Okay, and let me actually do modify freeze transformation on this. And what we'll do in the next video, actually, we'll see things like this. We're actually going to right click, go to vertex, select these individual vertices, then hit B, bring that down a little bit, and just pull this out a little bit so that we're just sort of sculpting out the cloth of the table. So I think that's good for this video. And what we'll do in the next video is we'll do a mesh cleanup where we reduce the polygons of this, because this is very high. And we'll just sort of tweak this more and more. So actually, let's a little wide there. Just gonna center this. Yeah, so in the next video, we'll not only clean up this, but we'll create maybe a little birthday cake for our detective scene.